Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, or good night, wherever you are in the world, and welcome to No Dice, No Glory, your one-stop shop for historical wargaming and miniature news. We're coming to you not at all live from a secret underground bunker deep in the wilds of West Virginia. Tonight's show is brought to you by our day jobs and alcohol, proudly fueling our gaming and our poor decision-making. Without any further ado, let's throw it over to the guys.
Well, thank you, Sean, and we're back now with episode 2 of NOM. With me, as always, is Tom, Iron Tom Burgess.
Hey, Scouts out.
And with us, a new guy, but a old friend, Brian Sherry, who has a lot of NOM experience. He was not there, but he has played it a lot. Say hi, Brian.
Hey, everybody. Yeah, I've watched enough movies that I feel like I was there.
So I was going to ask you guys a quick question. If I had to ask your favorite Vietnam movie, what is it?
We Are Soldiers for me.
Really? What about you, Brian?
We Were Soldiers.
Oh, boy, that's a tough one.
We tend to ask tough questions on the show.
Probably, well, it's got to be either Full Metal Jacket or Platoon.
You know, I'm going to go with one that we haven't mentioned, man. It's either Apocalypse Now or Boys of Company C. So, yeah. So since none of us were in Vietnam, we get to talk about it. So anyway, you know, when our first NOM podcast went out, a lot of folks downloaded it. So, you know, we got a different crew going this time. I think we should be able to top that and tell people how great this book is. I'll tell you, I've been talking about this book nonstop. I was at a tournament this past weekend at Your Hobby Place in Fredericksburg, Virginia. Thanks a lot, guys. And guys are getting excited for Vietnam. I spoke to, as we all know, Bob Everson. I saw him at the Chim at 4 o'clock this morning. Then I saw him at the Pentagon lunchroom about 5 hours later at 10. And I said, Bob, you were in Vietnam. So you should be excited about this. And Bob said, I'm not that old. So anyway.
Nice.
Yeah, so where we leave off, man. What was that, Brian?
He wasn't the guy who told you couldn't call it NOM. Right?
He was not. I need to find that guy. But you guys want to hear an interesting story before we go into this? So I said that story in a podcast, and then somebody liked a comment I made on Facebook. His name was Ed, and I'm like, why is that name familiar? So I'm like looking at my phone as I walked into work, and it said, this guy Ed liked your thing. I'm not going to mention his last name. And then he turns around. I get a phone call, and it's this guy, Ed. And he had to call me about something work-related because I spoke to him the week before about something work-related. And I said, yeah, I called you for 2 reasons. One is about this meeting. I said, yeah, I'll cover it. And then he goes, I was listening to this podcast. And I go, yeah, that's me. So we brought him out. Great guy, retired Air Force. We brought him out, and he played with my Germans. So you just be surprised who you run into. But I told him that we should meet for lunch at the Pentagon and just go down the Vietnam hallway and keep calling it NOM.
Nice.
My other question is it NOM or NAM?
I say NOM.
Well, if you're from Boston.
Yeah, NOM.
NAM. Vietnam.
So if you guys...
don't want to go over to NAM.
So if you guys are ready, I think we should talk about Marvin the ARVN.
Okay.
Well, here's the thing. These guys hosted the Vietnam War for the most part, and they were in the tour of duty, correct?
Yeah, they were.
And let's see what we have here. We can have the 1st ARVN Infantry Division, the Airborne Division, the 1st Cavalry Brigade, and the Marine Division. And were all those forces in previous books?
No.
Oh.
What has been added has been the River Task Force, which is like the Brown Water Navy, but it's manned by ARVN personnel, which also includes the ARVN Marine Platoon, and the M48 Squadron. That didn't exist in tour duty. The ARVN certainly had them. The 20th ARVN Tank Battalion was a pretty famous tank battalion that had some great actions against T-54s at like Do Hong Bridge and some other places. So.
Yeah, I just read a book, I think it was like Bloody April or something like that, or something April, and it's about the fall of South Vietnam, and they mentioned the 20th, and they mentioned the Airborne quite a bit, because I guess that was the elite of the ARVN forces, but, let's take a look at the first list. I mean, it's the infantry company. I tell you what I saw. I mean, you have to take 2 mandatory infantry platoons, and it comes with an anti-tank, a mortar fire base, a medic team, and infantry platoon. But I see here, like, this anti-tank platoon has a 57 millimeter recoilless rifle. Looking at its anti-tank value of 7, I guess this is good for light stuff.
Yeah, it's good for anything that's not a T-54.
Which is, if you're playing historical, that's what you're going to run up against, I would assume.
Well, the ARVN guys would be fighting T-54s in the later stage of the war, but you know, they still can take out the K-3s, the PT-76, and the armored personnel carriers and all the other armored stuff. Plus, it's also got good use against infantry, so it's, you know, it's not a bad thing to have.
Yep, it's heat, it's recoilless. And then looking at the infantry platoon, it's I think it's like pretty much the same size as U.S. What's the first thing you kind of notice about these cats?
Well, the biggest thing that I recall from having played against these guys a lot is that patronage rule is gone. So they don't have that deal where they used to roll to see whether they were palace lackeys or whether they were actually decent officers and so on. So they had a very different morale system. It was almost like the anti-unknown hero from the Italians. Kind of worked almost in reverse. And so that's gone. So it's a little more straightforward to play the ARVN infantry now.
Yeah, but look at their ratings. That courage of 5 up, skill of 5 up, a rally of 5 up. I mean, these guys are not exactly, they're not paying for the stay. What do you guys think?
Well, it's probably historically accurate. I mean, they're not particularly motivated. They've got a corrupt government. It's that's their homeland, and the U.S. support's dubious and gets more dubious as time goes on from the perspective. So, I don't know I'd be that enthusiastic to be an ARVN soldier myself back in those days.
Yeah, it is interesting, though, you say that, Mitch, because one thing I noticed, and I don't know if you guys had a chance to talk about this last time about the U.S. forces, they've homogenized some of the choices, and I was going to throw that out, and maybe I'm wrong, but the U.S., for example, had guys that were not particularly good at tour of duty, the Golden Dragons, the 2nd and the 14th, and they were confident trained. I don't see them in the new book at all. I think they replaced them with Marines. And here with the ARVN, their average unit, the 1st Infantry, which is what we're looking at here, they were confident trained before. But now they've got that Courage 5 up, which is the reluctant, like the 18th Infantry Division. So in the previous book, you did have the option of using the elite, or at least the 1st Infantry Division was decent. The 18th was probably your historical average ARVN unit, which is not too reliable. And then you had your airborne division as fearless trained.
Yeah, these guys are just not that good.
Yeah, and the 1st Infantry Division was one of their better infantry divisions. It was kind of one of their more, as far as the line units go, one of the more elite ones.
So it seems like they've decided to kind of go with the maybe the majority. They've really amalgamated the ARVN infantry into one choice, and they've kind of gone with what the majority would have looked like, which is not fantastic in terms of morale and motivation.
Yeah, well, I agree. They're hit on 3 up. But something interesting I've noticed is that in the infantry platoon itself, you could take a super bazooka, an M60 mortar, or M60 machine gun, but you can take a tank as a part of the infantry platoon. I can't recall too many lists that you can do that on. There are other lists in this book you can do it on, but...
That's interesting. It's sort of like the French World War II penny packet kind of doctrine.
Yeah.
Right, sprinkle them in with the infantry.
But they're cheap.
In 48, no less.
They're cheap. It's 3 points for a platoon of 7 stands, and then even if you buff it up with everything and hit a tank, I think it tops out at, I'm going to do some math in public here, but it's 4, 5, 6, 7... Yeah, it's like 10 points, and you get 10 stands and a tank. That's something that maybe would hold an objective, but I can't see much more for them. Go ahead, sir.
I was going to say, I just want to check the stats real quick, but believe it or not, they're kind of balanced out by their skill checks are all 4 plus, aren't they? I scroll down to I'm looking at the PAVN, and the PAVN skill check is 5+. That's for the regulars, not the local force.
Yep.
So their skill checks are actually superior to what we would call NBA regulars, which I'm sure some people might take issue with. But in terms of balance, you can see that they've given them lousy morale, but not bad ability to dig in or to take movement orders.
Well, their skill for digging in movement orders is still 5+.
I'm sorry.
What's up is their ability to assault. That's 4+. So that's so they're hitting as trained units, but they're digging in and calling in for fire and doing blitz moves as 5+, like the PAVN guys.
Okay, so they're the same. I'm sorry. I thought I saw 4+s there.
Well, it's a good transition. The Airborne Infantry Platoon. Well, actually, wait. Let me see. The company command has a 4-up skill. But if you scroll down to the actual infantry platoon here on page 129, which means nothing for anybody out there, it's not as great. And it looks like the infantry, the airborne, is not much better. And that was supposed to be kind of their elite.
Well, they got a good morale morale 3-up, rally 4-up. Guys, I'm wondering when do you roll morale when it's not rally?
When you're pinned.
Yeah.
Okay, so they're going to unpin on 3s, but they.
Yeah. Well, rally is what they unpin on, and morale is to be removed from a break test.
Well, so morale 3's not bad.
No.
And it is. You're paying a little bit more for the airborne dudes.
And it's like that for their armored vehicles too. When we get to them later on, they don't remount very well, but they're not too bad on just sticking around.
Yes. So looking at so far the infantry, it's headquarters, 2 mandatory platoons, an anti-tank platoon. You get the infantry fire base. The let me see.
Just mortars, offboard mortars.
Yeah, and the airborne looks like they get. It says airborne mortar platoon or airborne mortar fire base. So they can either get the mortars in the field or back at the fire base. But it pretty much looks the same. They're cheap. You could also add a tank. It just represents, I guess, the better part of their forces. Let's look at this armored cav here. I mean, it's not as robust as the U.S. armored cav. I think, you can't get like 50 M113s here, but yeah, it's like just like Tom said, man, their remounts are 5-up. They're never getting back in.
This is interesting because if you go and you read Bright Shining Lie, Neil Sheehan talks about the Battle of Ap-Bak, and they had that was really a major watershed in an understanding of the United States that they needed to bring in their own troops because they had these. They weren't ACAVs, they were M113s, and they didn't even have a gun shield, like the picture of the command, track. They got hammered by PAVN infantry holding the village of Ap-Bak, and they, first of all, it was impossible to get them to attack, and then when they did attack, they got pinned down by very accurate fire, and the PAVN were picking off the 50 gunners. And those tracks stalled out, and they lost some tracks to RPG, and they couldn't get them to move. So, unfortunately, pretty historical performance, I would say, on a 5-up, courage, and a remount 5-up.
Yeah, but they kind of make up for it because they have so many. I mean, they can afford to have a platoon or 2 bolt. I played a game last weekend against almost 50-some vehicles at 50 points, and they weren't that horrible.
Wow.
They did stay bailed out a lot, but the platoon still stuck around for multiple times to give them more chances to remount. So it was still kind of hard to break them.
You're looking for 5 ACAVs and for 4 points.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I've got a battle report coming on the forums from that game. I don't know when it's going to be posted, but it was rough, and we just played at 50 points, and we had the board filled.
Hey, now, guys, let me throw a little wrench in the works for a second, since it's my first show with you. I do want to point out, I don't think we've touched on it yet, and I think one thing to keep in mind with the ARVN 2, even though they may look fragile, they're real cheap. they're going to benefit from that medevac medic rule. And so you look at them and just look at these stats, you're thinking, oh, these guys aren't so great, they're fragile, they can run away, but don't forget they're going to benefit from that free world medic rule for their infantry that can really give some real staying power.
Yeah, and that's new for them. They didn't have medics in tour of duty.
No.
Yeah, but the armored cav, I mean, it's 2 mandatory ACAV platoons, backed up by 106 and 125 mortars. You can take both. Some Walker Bulldogs and a Zippo flamethrower platoon. These guys, I think they're cheap. I think an ARVN force is going to be huge. It's probably going to be the biggest force in the game. If you go all out, if you play this at 100 points or so, you're going to have a massive ARVN force, but I think half your force is going to probably be gone. I don't think these guys will stick around much. And then looking at the Walker Bulldogs, which is going on to their tanks, you take platoons of 5, but if you look at their morale, it's a 4-up, remount 5-up, skill check 5, cross at 4+, and they mount the 76 millimeter gun, which can fire beehive. I mean, they're cheap. 5 of them for 6 points.
Yep.
I mean, you can, if you're going to spam, this to me is your spam list in this game.
No, it's a good tank, with the rate of fire 2 and the AT-14. It can handle everything but a T-54, but it can get on the flanks of the T-54s just fine. The new rules with the for version 4 type rules where you can't fire main gun and machine guns kind of hurt. So when you're firing beehives, that's all you're getting now. You're not getting beehives and machine guns.
Yeah.
But they're still very versatile. The game I played this weekend, my opponent Charles Christie had a squadron of the ACAV and a tanker, a Walker Bulldog tank squadron.
Yeah, and I think you're going to want to take them if because you pointed out, Mitch, that they have the remount 5-up, so they're like British tally-ho, on remounting on 5s, but you don't want to take them in 4 or 5, so you're not facing that remount check so quickly.
Yeah, and you keep your command tank at hand, so for those re-rolls. That 5+ is manageable on a remount.
And remember, the rules now state you can try to get back in before you have to test.
Yeah.
So, but with their armor, the Walker Bulldogs are going to get killed by RPGs, but they do get the M48s, which are much more expensive. 5 of those are 20 points, but stat line's not any better, but I think if you're going to run ARVN tanks, you have to take a platoon of these guys.
Yeah, it's a lot of points. I mean, when you're looking at a platoon of costing 16 points for M48s if you just take 4 of them, or even 20 points if you take 5 of them. I mean, that's a lot of other stuff, and it's a lot of points all concentrated in a single unit. And what happens is the victory point conditions are different in Vietnam. You lose a victory point for every tank you lose. So if you take a 5 tank platoon and the whole platoon is destroyed and lost, that's actually 6 victory points from that one unit. So you got to be careful with the heavy stuff in Nam.
Yeah, and you look at the M48, the Army and Marine are 35 points for 5, but they're a lot better. Yeah,
that is quite a steal.
But, I mean, we know from Team Yankee, guys like throwing a lot of crap on the table. And if you want to spam, if you want to be that guy, the ARVN forces give you the chance to do that.
Yeah, well, so, when you're playing the ARVN, that's what you got to do.
Yeah.
They're not effective any other way.
Yeah, you almost have to. Let's round out the ARVN here with the brown water guys, and I believe it's almost pointed, not pointed, but it's almost the same construct as the U.S., but they get, their courage is a little bit better. This Marine Infantry platoon, even though it's only a 5-up skill, it's still not bad with courage, morale, and rally. You can't get the tank in it, obviously, because it's on a boat. But I mean, it doesn't look like it's a bad deal. here's my thing. Brian, you know more gamers that do different things. Have you ever seen anybody play with these boats?
Yes.
You guys have?
My friend Charles Christie, we've got them. We use them.
I've never seen them on the table. I've always wanted to give it a shot. I'm a real kind of ground poundy guy myself, so I never collected boats. I know someone who has them, but we haven't put them out yet.
Yeah, I've only used them a few times. It takes a lot because I have to use my geohex to set up the rivers, and it's very board intensive to put together a battlefield for these things. But it's cool when you do it. I mean, it's just a very different, neat thing to do. It's kind of like almost running armored trains in World War II.
Yeah, I kind of wonder if this is almost like a separate game for the guys that want to do it. Well,
my understanding, is there any other way to take the Marine infantry? Not to jump too far ahead, but is there any other way to take them other than along with a river task force?
Nope.
Yeah.
You can?
Yeah, you could take them as a support choice in another ARVN formation.
Okay, because then I think this might be what you were looking for, Mitch, in terms of some higher quality ARVN infantry.
Oh, yes, you could take it as an ARVN support platoon because we're about to get into that. But you're right. I mean, but this is, you can only take one platoon of them.
Yeah, just one.
Yeah, so I mean, my opinion is, I think the ARVN player has some really good choices here, but it's your horde. This is your armored horde. And then going forward, you look at their support. You have Hueys, Medevacs, 105s, 155s, either Firebase or on the table. Their air is Sky Raiders. What is the M108? Is that the 105 artillery battery?
And 108 should be the self-propelled.
Yeah, because you can take M108s or M109s, and I'm trying to find them.
It's probably just U.S. ones. They probably don't have them from the ARVN list themselves. They're probably actually U.S. support.
And speaking of U.S. support, you're right.
The U.S. support.
Yep, it's U.S. support. You could take either an American support platoon or an ANZAC support platoon. And you get Army gunships and Army command and control helicopters. The ARVN do have the Sky Raiders, but you can also take U.S. So, you know what I'm thinking about the ARVN? It's, if I have my list and I'm doing U.S. or Marines or something that's good, I'm going to take these guys like a small formation as a filler. And maybe keep them somewhere, like if holding an objective on my end of the board, while my other forces attack. I mean, hopefully they can hold, but I mean it's kind of like they're the East Germans of Nam. I don't know are you guys inclined to take these as its own force or maybe as support?
Yeah, I've primarily a PAVN player, so I don't really have any. I fight these guys all the time. I don't really have any great plans to run them, but my buddy Charles Christie does fairly well with them, and he mostly just goes all mounted. He rarely takes infantry, so it's pretty much just floods the jungles full of 113s and makes it tough. When they're concealed, that 3+ is not a big deal, and you're almost always concealed everywhere on a board for Nam. And almost every mission.
Yeah. From a fluff perspective, if you want to call it that, or historical perspective, I don't recall reading too much about having an intermixing of U.S. units and ARVN units. They would have advisors, U.S. advisors leading them, but. So, historically, if you're putting a scenario together, you're probably not going to mix them together. I suppose the U.S. player, if they wanted to go with some really high-quality, expensive tanks or something, and then they wanted some cheap infantry, they might want to do that. But, the U.S. infantry, and we can get to that a little bit later when we talk about the medic rules, which are coming up. In my experience, the U.S. infantry dug in with the ability to use medics is so phenomenally hard to get out.
Yep.
Entrenched position. I don't know if you really need the ARVN to do that for you. You can do that with a small platoon of Americans.
Yeah. Well, you can't assault them because the flechette rules from the M79s. I never have been able to pull off successful assaults against dug-in free world, the U.S. forces. So, but now you have the ability with your artillery to, repeat re-roll saves on repeat bombardments. So that's gonna make that tactic with just one or two small units a little less viable. So you might need to have a bit more robust organization if you just want a sit and hold unit, because one good artillery strike can take out a small platoon.
And speaking of artillery, let me throw out an aside here. It's very curious to me. It's interesting that NAM is the rule set where we're seeing a heavy use of off-table artillery.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Isn't that a little interesting? I mean, the first time I ever saw it was the original Stalingrad across the Volga rule, right? Way back when, the dinosaurs roamed the earth. But somehow NAM, where you'd actually have, I don't know if you'd quite be on table, but you'd have some pretty close fire support bases out there, from the U.S. side, and the PAVN artillery the same way. Again, not famed for their artillery barrages, but they also, would often be close in. So it's kind of interesting that we have this grab them by the belt rule set that gives us off-table artillery, which a lot of realists, people who are sticklers for realism have clamored for in Flames of War for a long time.
I'll tell you what I like about that. I like about it that I really want to concentrate on doing infantry fights with these guys, PAVN against Free World. I kind of like that because it's realistic.
Yeah.
But, they should have that for all the games, personally. But I'm not going to go in there. It's, and then, the other thing you brought up, too, about units fighting together. You hear about an ARVN unit getting stuck. The U.S. would come and rescue them. Yeah, I don't read too many accounts, and once again, I don't know everything, that you just didn't see that intercooperation that much. They tend to fight on their own. So,
it's pretty rare historically. I mean, when it happens, it stands out, like the corseting in North Africa.
Yeah.
You hear about that, and because it's unusual. So I think that's the same kind of thing here. And frankly, there was actually some, I think, level of disdain, inter-service disdain, on occasion, that people didn't want to be saddled down by the ARVN.
Well, there's distrust because quite often when you're working with South Vietnamese units, there's enough informants in those organizations that it seemed like the enemy already knew it was coming. So I'd imagine that you didn't work with ARVN units if you're U.S. units unless you absolutely had to.
Yeah.
And, you think like Lam Son, they have this first part of the operation was a U.S. operation, and then there's a phase line, and then the U.S. doesn't pass that phase line, and the ARVN units keep going deeper. So there's definitely some concern, and you can go find lots of accounts of lack of cooperation, mostly because they wouldn't tell their ARVN counterparts if they were cooperating with them until the last minute, because if they told them something up front, that information about that mission would get out.
Yeah, it's interesting. It would have been neat, but maybe this is a game within a game, that you could have bought a U.S. advisor team, which comes on a small base, that could have increased the morale and the skill of your ARVN troops. It probably would come at a hell of a cost, but
yeah, and also call in fire support much better.
Yeah, which is kind of a big thing they did. It's kind of
interesting you point that out. There's no options for U.S. advisors. Any kind of advisor team is there.
Little boost. Yeah, should be at the battalion level.
Well, one other thing I'm thinking, Mitch, is that kind of like we were talking a little bit before we started recording about Team Yankee stuff. Actually, it might be an option for American player to consider an armored horde using ARVN tanks. It's similar like to a Soviet player in Team Yankee, using those East German tanks and knowing that they have their limitations, right?
Yeah.
But you get a lot of them for cheap, 10 points tanks that have a good gun. Same thing, you're talking about a 15-point discount to take 5 ARVN patents.
Yeah.
That's significant.
Yeah, it definitely is. Hey, so there's something like, since I've really not played Vietnam very much. Before we go on to the Commonwealth forces or the other free world, how does that medic rule work with the medics and the dust-offs?
Well, basically,
I would say basically your guys get an extra hit point. Your infantry units take 2 hits to kill.
Potentially, but
Yeah.
they can still get taken out by a single one, but there's a chance that it just causes a wound versus a straight-up kill. And then you can move those wounds around, and medics can help get rid of them.
Yeah, maybe we should walk through it real quick because, one of the things that stuck out in my mind when I was listening to your guys' part 1 is there was some discussion about how, this is potentially a book that you could play alongside,
Fate of a Nation. Yep.
Or even Team Yankee. But I was wondering, the complications that arise from using the medic rules and the guerrilla warfare, born in the North to die in the South, that kind of stuff. That really does just give these lists in this book distinguishing features that may not be fully compatible with those other systems.
That's a good point.
I'm having trouble pulling up the rule. You guys have a page site for the medic rule?
I am looking through equipment special rules because I'm trying to look up triage, and I don't see it. It's not here. I am looking.
All the way in the back by the mission rules.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah.
All right.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. It gets much further back. It's kind of strange how some of the rules are up front along with the weapon. Few that are all the way in the back.
Okay, triage and medevac, page 200. And by the way, guys, I'm going to save us a little bit of trouble. It's interesting because they say these only apply in scenarios that use triage and medevac. There's only one scenario that does not use it, and that's that little city fight one at the very end, the streets.
Yeah.
So if you're playing NOM, you're playing triage and medevac.
Pretty much.
Yeah. So where do we go? 200, right?
So look at triage. A team with triage special rule can receive 3 wound markers, either from being shot at or transferring them from other teams. If it is shot and receives a 4th wound marker, it's destroyed. So that gives a little resiliency to your infantry.
That's the medic team. Your regular teams under wounded teams all get basically, if I mix my genres here, they get basically a Space Marine armor save. We're inversed, but it's 5+, and if they roll a 5+, they die. But if they roll a 1 through 4, they get a wound marker. You can't have more than 1 wound marker. If you get a second wound marker,
you're done.
You're destroyed. So you've got a 2/3 chance to live, even when your infantry team is quote unquote killed. And then the point of the medevac and the medic teams and the helicopters is they can take those. You can pass those through transferring the wounded. And I guess we should mention that if you do have a wounded marker, there is a disadvantage in that you count as your moving rate of fire and cannot charge into contact.
That makes sense.
For U.S. troops on the defensive fire, that's actually still not bad. They're like Tom said, there's still hell to try to charge with the shotguns. But you can transfer those wound markers, so you can actually kind of daisy chain them away from your fighting troops toward the rear, toward the medic or the medevac chopper, and then you can transfer them to those units, and you can get rid of them off of the medevac helicopter. They can I think they can fly them away.
Yeah, or medic boats if you're doing the riverine operations. They do the same thing.
If they loiter, if the helicopter loiters, then it loses all the wounded markers and it comes back. So what this does is something unlike anywhere else in Flames of War. It gives free world forces an extra hit point. And when those free world forces are American veterans, like the air cav that are 4+ to hit to begin with, and they're dug in and gone to ground, you're hitting them on 6s, then they've got to fail their 3-up save, then they've essentially got to fail another 3-up save. You could call it a 1 to 4 save. Even to put so then you got, that's what you need to do to kill them. And I'm sorry, I think I missed the firepower check, right? So it really exponentially increases the survivability of the free world infantry. And now it's been expanded to the ARVN. So, that's going to make them, despite their liabilities, much more resilient than you would think just looking at their stat line.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting. I mean it's like I said, it adds so much flavor to the game. I kind of dig it. You guys ready to move on to the Australians and New Zealanders?
Yep, sure.
Kiwis and Aussies.
You'll dig it as long as you're a free world player, but when you're a PAVN player trying to get those guys off of an entrenched objective, you're gonna really need it.
Well, that's where I've been lucky. My main free world opponent runs the ARVN armored formations. He rarely takes any infantry, and he needs to reconsider that.
So, hey, the first thing I noticed about the guys from Down Under is that they get, if you look at those command teams, they were really good to have around your infantry. Let's look at the Australians let's see what you get. You could take Australian Regiment, New Zealand Infantry, 1st Armored, and 3rd Cav. But going on to the Australians, let's look at that Rifle Company HQ. Courage, 2 up. Morale, 2 up. Rally, 2 up. Skill, 2 up. I mean, that's pretty good.
Yep.
They're hit on 4. But these guys kind of look just like the others. You have to take 2 mandatory rifle platoons, pioneer platoon, anti-tank, medic team, mortar fire base, and a rifle platoon. And this is the Australians. Once again, the 90mm anti-tank for anti-tank, but once again, your rifle platoon can add a Centurion tank. Not too bad.
Yeah, and that's a remount 2+.
Yeah.
I think the Allies could have won this war if they just sent more ANZACs.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Or what did you say last episode? The shirtless mortar guys just need to.
Yeah. The ANZAC Pioneer platoon looks pretty good. It's pricey, but for 10 points you get 5 SLR M60 teams with 2 flamethrowers. That's not bad.
And they don't go away anymore.
They don't go away. So, I mean, the Australians are pretty good. The New Zealanders, I think, are pretty much the same, but their courage is not the same. They're 1 point higher in almost every stat. And maybe this game was, designed by New Zealanders. But theirs is, once again, same composition, and you're paying less for them. But their rifle platoons cannot take the tank. So
this is a subtle dig on the part of the New Zealanders. So the Australians are, many of them descended from, convicts who were transported.
Yeah.
So I think that's why they have the crazy morale, because they're all nutters, right? And
yeah.
The New Zealanders are telling us they're more refined. And they know when to back off and fight another day.
Yeah. And let me look at and even the tank, I believe, that you take here. No, looks like all the tanks in this are Australian, not New Zealand. So,
well, they're ANZACs, so doesn't that mean they're both Australian, New Zealand Army Corps?
Yeah, but it looks like you can't really mix them. Like you could take an ANZAC support formation, but yeah, it looks like the Australians are a little bit better than the Kiwis. So the question I was going to ask is, and I didn't play Fate of a Nation, but the Centurion tanks, is this pretty much the same stat line as the Israeli version? I thought the AT was higher with the Israelis, but
I don't know. I'd have to look. I didn't play.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Yeah, I would suspect. I mean, it's the same time frame, right? This would be.
Yeah.
I've got 3 of them. I can't even remember.
65, 68. Well, when did let's scooch up here and take a look at the background text. Maybe they'll tell us when they first got in there.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of background text.
There was a request in 1965 for them to come, and in 1968, Vietnam requested New Zealand to increase its commitment. So sometime after 65. And so what's the fate of a nation is 67? They should be roughly the same.
Yeah. But you get 3 tanks in your HQ, and you also get to upgrade the gun to a... See, here's the thing I don't get. And I'm on page 152 with the Tank Squadron HQ. Increase the anti-tank of all... Oh, so you could just increase the QF 20-pounder to an extra .8 AT. I guess that would be improved ammo?
Yeah, I think so.
And for a platoon of 4, you're paying 28 points. So these guys are not cheap. So you figure it's 32 points for the AT-17, which I don't think you'll need.
Yeah, we have to do a quick number crunch, and maybe Tom's got them memorized already, but looking at the T-54s to see what they would want.
Yeah, well, I was going back to digging up Fate of a Nation. So they had armor 12 on the front, 6 on the side, 2 on the top. The 20-pounder had AT-17 in Fate of a Nation, so it looks like it was a little bit better in the Israeli version.
And the T-55, the K2 Ironclad, front armor of 13.
13, right.
Yeah. So, I mean,
so
it's...
from 3 to 4. I mean, it'll make them more effective, obviously, against them, but...
Yeah, well, the big thing is the rate of fire.
Yeah, it goes down on the move. And
yeah, you're probably right, Mitch, that you probably don't need that. But I guess if you know you're playing, Lamson or something, or you're gonna, Aussies at Lamson, and you're gonna be up against hordes of T-54s, maybe it's worth it.
Yeah, it's interesting. Moving on with the armored cav. Kind of a neat thing that they did is, didn't they they put turrets on top of their 113s, didn't they?
Yeah.
Which, has like,
they got the T-50 turret.
Yeah, the fire support vehicle.
Yeah.
Put a 76 millimeter gun on it. There's also...
Not just that, but the main, if you look at the patrol, well, you kind of can't see it on the, command track, but if you look down at the patrol, you see there's it's got a little turret on top of the M113. It's the T-50 or the M74 turret.
Yep.
And depending on which one you take, it's got different guns.
Yeah, I mean, this actually is
50 cal or just regular machine guns.
This actually may not be a bad little list to take. I mean, it's not cheap, but that M113 FSV's fire support, what Tom said, with the 76 millimeter gun, that's not bad, and it's a breakthrough gun. It has a 2-up firepower. So I mean, you want to dig out and Beehive. So if you want to dig out PAVN, right here you go.
I think this is a neat list. I think that the ANZACs have always had, they're an elite formation, really. They've got good stuff. They got good kit. They got great stats. They're not cheap, but they're not too expensive.
Yeah.
I was wondering why that fire support vehicle though doesn't have a bombardment capability. Seems like would be its main purpose, but it's direct fire only.
Yeah. Let's look at support. I mean, most of their support, unless you take a Mobile 108 or Mobile 109, is all off-base fire support.
Yep.
They have no air themselves. They would rely on, looks like here, Army or U.S. Army Skyhawk air support flight. For those air enthusiasts, the Skyhawk was a Navy plane. And you could take a ANZAC support platoon or American or ARVN. You can't take both. So you could take an ANZAC support and an American platoon and play it that way. These guys are not bad. I think these guys are going to be an interesting force. But I think with the ARVN, you're going to have a lot of vehicles and maybe something in support. With the U.S., I see U.S. players just going heavy U.S. I think these guys are a really good filler. I would take that Cav troop to support my American Marines because it's not big. It's, you look at it, it's 2 mandatory platoons. You could put the turret on top. You can have some mortar carrier in there. And to me, for less than 20, 30 points, well, definitely less than 20 points, you could take a pretty good collection of 113. So I like these guys. I think we're going to see them on a lot of tables just because they're interesting and unique.
Yeah, but when we get into the PAVN forces, you're just going to find that, I think you're going to find that 100 points is rarely going to be played. Like I said, so far, I've only been able to manage, at 50 points, I put out a full PAVN infantry battalion and a local forces battalion, both. And I never was able to do that in any way, shape, or form in Tour of Duty or Brown Water Navy or any of those other incarnations. So when you start thinking 100 points, you're just going to have a ton of stuff on the board. It just seems like everything is scaled down in cost.
Yeah.
Unless you put in M48 Centurions and T-54s, you just got to watch those point levels.
Well, and let's look at other games that have come out on this 100-point scale. So when Team Yankee came out, they said, let's say a game is 100 points, and I think they threw it out there as an example, and that just became the standard. Everything was 100 points. It's like I said in the first podcast, to me this is a 50-point infantry fight, maybe even less, that you can play this game with small forces, small model count, and have a good time because these scenarios totally kick ass. And then the one thing I noticed about the Centurion, it doesn't have the side skirts that the Israeli version, the Sha'at, did. So it's not bad. So I know the commies that the three of us are, because I think we all play communist forces in one game or another. I know we're excited about doing the PAVN, but I think we should take a break and turn it back to Sean in the studio, and I guess we'll be right back, right?
While the boys head off to refill their beers, remember to head on over to www.nodicenoGlory.com and sign up for our forums, where you can keep the conversation going with list discussions, army tactics, and so much more. That's www.nodicenoGlory.com.
Hey, Sean, thanks very much for bringing us back. And now we're getting ready to talk about the real good guys of the war. Communist forces of North Vietnam and South Vietnam, starting off with the PAVN.
So let's do a historical note, because I know that we're all big history guys. Talk about the difference between the two.
Yeah. I don't know, Tom, if you want to...
Yeah, so PAVN is really...
Nope.
PAVN's mostly referring to NVA regulars, the more solid formations. These would be the guys that you saw in We Are Soldiers versus some of the other movies would you'd see more of the local forces or Viet Cong. It would be kind of like the... and there's also another category that we don't see. You have the main force Viet Cong, and you have the local force Viet Cong. And there's really the main force is essentially soldiers from North Vietnam basically running around as being infiltrated and moved right into VC units. So they're kind of like a hybridized unit.
Yeah,
I think it's fair to say that there were not everything was uniform, and there were phases historically as to what they were composed of. You certainly got what we call our NVA regulars, which is redundant. It's funny that Americans would say that, but the NVA regulars is what they term the PAVN, and they've got the sun helmets, and these guys are generally going to be they're going to be conscripts. There's a great Osprey on the PAVN, by the way. It does, I think, a really interesting job describing how they were recruited and trained and what their life was like. Real interesting. I mean, they'd say, like, if you're in the Army, if you've got 365 and a wake up, right? You're gonna, if you're lucky, you're gonna do your tour. You're going home. Well, there was two ways out of the war. for the PAVN soldier. You're either dead or you win.
Yeah.
You took that from Apocalypse Now. You took that from Apocalypse Now, sir.
Yeah, there was no. I mean, there were. I guess there were some very, very rare cases, maybe, where somebody might get a little bit of home leave or something. But essentially, they didn't get leave. They were in the war to win or to die. And so the PAVN guys have been reasonably well trained up north, and they're very highly motivated. They're either people who've grown up under they've grown up under a system where they've been trying to overthrow oppressive regime after oppressive regime. It was the French and the Japanese and the French again. Yeah. And the Americans came in, and they're very motivated to get their country to be theirs. A lot of them were, they were the heirs of the Viet Minh. The Viet Minh were seen as the legitimate anti-colonialist forces, and that Ho Chi Minh led. They did a great job in the recent PBS Vietnam series on this. The first episode, I thought it was a ballsy move. I thought the first episode was ballsy because they said, you know what, we're going to start this series about the Vietnam War by talking about Vietnam. And that first episode told you about the whole history of the Vietnamese people, what they'd been through, and that Viet Minh part, which I think most Americans at that time especially, and even now, didn't realize that there was this very popular
government
military movement to free the country that was led by Ho Chi Minh. It became aligned with the communist powers when it became clear that the West wasn't going to help them. So those PAVN guys are really motivated. They're indoctrinated by communist ideology. When the country was split in two, a lot of the southern diehards of the Viet Minh moved up there, and vice versa. A lot of Catholics, especially, who had been strongly allied with the French government, moved down. So you've got that PAVN, you've got them, I guess you'd say, fairly well trained, very highly motivated, coming from a ideologically, I think it's fair to say, oppressive regime. But so they're being controlled, but they believe in their cause. And the ones in the South, the main force, I think it's fair to say, would start it off with probably a lot of actually South Vietnamese, and these would have been Viet Minh who stayed behind, probably for the very purpose of creating cells of resistance. And the main force are fairly, again, reasonably well trained. I don't know if you could analogize it to the U.S. Army, you could say like the PAVN is the regular Army. The main force would be sort of like your reserves, who are a bit higher level readiness and training, and then your local forces, your National Guard. But of course, they're guerrillas, those two second groups, right? So they're part of the National Liberation Front. They have their own little two-colored flag instead of the plain red flag with the yellow star. They've got red and blue to symbolize the two parts of the country. But as time went on, as Tom said, first of all, you probably had cells of North Vietnamese or PAVN regulars advising or creating these things. And as time went on, especially after the Tet Offensive, the local, and they called themselves the National Liberation Forces, the NLF. The NLF was almost completely wiped out by the Tet Offensive.
Yeah, and there was entire companies that would just PAVN company would all of a sudden just become a local main force battalion.
And that was done to maintain the illusion of local legitimacy, that these are, indigenous South Vietnamese forces that are pro-communist or pro-North, which at one point they probably were, but then they all got killed. So they filled them out with guys from the North.
Yeah, I did some of my later units with a mix of the local force and the PAVN regulars. So I did a couple units that are just kind of could be main force.
Yeah, I mean, it's these guys are just the way they fought the war. I mean, we could talk about that Kensburn special for a while.
Let me throw one thing in here, and I wish I can't find the name of the quote, but there's a quote online, and the CIA facts videos have a great video. There's a scene in one of the early battles of a special forces camp, and there's an American who will later on go on to become a general of the special forces of the United States. And they interviewed him after an attack by the NVA, the PAVN. And they said, General, what did you think of the enemy? And I'm roughly paraphrasing, but he said, they're the finest soldiers I've ever seen. I'd give anything to have 100 of them under my command.
Nice.
And then they asked him, well, how about the Vietnamese on our side? And he said, I'd rather not comment. So this is the respect that, and this is, they call them, the soldiers say, you call them Charlie or Mr. Charles. There was a lot of hatred, there's a lot of anger and things like that, but there was a lot of respect. Charlie was not to be, underestimated.
But Charlie,
so I think when people come into this, they should see like PAVN they're not going to be bad. They're going to be pretty good at doing certain things.
But Charlie don't surf, sir.
That's true.
So
I like that quote too about I think it was Ho Chi Minh. He said something you'll kill one of us, or you'll kill 100 of us, and we'll kill 10 of you, but you'll be the one who tires of the war.
Well, you can say he was right.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, I think we waxed a little poetic.
No, it's fine.
But it's a good idea for people who don't know, just to understand
the history,
where they came from. Watch that PBS series and see why these guys were so willing to take these casualties and keep fighting against.
And one thing that we probably ought to acknowledge is that there's inherently not popular. A lot of folks just don't want to run the communists. But if you want to have a Vietnam scene, somebody's got to take the plunge, and like I did for my local group. I mean, you've got to be willing to bring those forces to bear to get these games going.
Yeah, strangely not as popular as the Germans for World War II. I don't know. Go figure.
Or the West Germans and Team Yankee.
It helps the Battlefront seems to always give the Germans really good stats no matter where they are.
Yeah.
I mean, if you read Team Yankee, or especially Ralph Peters' Red Army, the West Germans are they're conscripts. They got great kit. None of them really want to be there, and most of them don't know what they're doing. But in Team Yankee, they're better trained than the U.S. Army. So.
Well.
All right, that was an aside.
So much.
Nice.
So with the other forces we mentioned, they all have their own separate org charts. But the PAVN forces really only have one. And within that, there's a lot of stuff you could take here, folks. You could do a PAVN infantry battalion, a special task battalion, or a local forces infantry battalion. On the armored side, because we knew that Vietnam was really big in armored battles, you could take a K-1 ironclad battalion, which are T-34 85s, a T-54 K-2 ironclad battalion, and I believe the K-3 was the PT-76 ironclad battalion. Looking at their support, you get a front artillery company, which I believe is off board. You get mortars on board. You get a front jet artillery, which is rockets.
You can only take that or the front artillery, one or the other.
And that's a big gun. That's a 152, I'm gathering.
130.
130.
It's a 130. Yeah, and it's they had 152s as well, but most of them were 130s, and they can outrange the U.S. 155s.
And you could take a recoilless gun, 120 millimeter mortar, and then because the U.S. has so much air. You could take, looks like a Bofors 37 millimeter AA company, probably left over by the French, or the 14.5. Soviet one. And then you have the
37, yeah.
Then you have the Soviet. That's just like a big machine gun. That's a 50 cal, I guess, right? Or a little bit bigger.
A little bit bigger. That's the 14.5. That would be your same barrel, basically 20 millimeter gun that's on your ZSU 23-4. So it's a bit more robust than a 50 cal.
And rounding out the support, you could take any platoon in support, and then you have local resistance. So moving down to that battalion, first thing I'm noticing too, it's the courage for the infantry battalion command team is 2, morale 2, rally 2, skill not so great, but look at that counterattack, a 2 up.
Yeah, one thing that kind of surprises me about NAM is that the battalion headquarters have higher ratings, and I know that was important in Team Yankee because in Team Yankee you didn't get rerolls. You used your headquarters skill or headquarters morale if they're in range. But now in this, you get the rerolls. So I don't understand why they felt like the battalion headquarters need to have higher skill and higher morale for just a few teams. It made sense in the Team Yankee construct, but now they went towards version 4. It wasn't as necessary. So I don't know what deliverance or thought was involved in that process.
Hey guys, I just want to let you know I sourced that quote so that people don't think I'm full of crap. The Siege of Play May in 1965. It was Major Charles Beckwith, nicknamed Charging Charlie, who said that. And he later went on to command special forces and created Delta Force.
Didn't he get in trouble?
Who doesn't, you know?
Yeah, that's true. But looking at these cats right away, and, you know, I like playing the red. You got to take 2 mandatory companies. Damn, those companies are big.
Yeah, but I don't run them at full size. I just tend to run. It just gets too unwieldy.
It's 25 teams for 21 points at full size.
So
that's crazy.
The thing about this too is now, you know, talking about extra layers of complexity is that on the other side from what the free world forces have, which is the medevac rules, we've got the born in the north to die in the south rule, which can pay dividends when you take really big units. Because what this means is, and now I think, by the way, I just want to give a shout out to Tom and your co-writer. They've said so much. I can't even begin to touch the amount of great info that they laid down on the No Dice No Glory website with their articles on PAVN and the VC. But that rule, now they use a morale check when they're destroyed, or if you wish, you can voluntarily destroy them, bring them back at full strength. Used to be that you'd give them attachments, they lose their attachments. I don't think that's the case anymore. So that is, I think, militates in favor of taking a large unit, because when you bring them back, you're like, yeah, you killed 20 dudes, here's another 20 dudes.
Yeah, I still think that just because the size, it makes sense, but you want to pull these guys off frequently. You know, so, and if you have a big cluster and that's all you have in one area, it's just kind of harder to pull them off. You really want to have that flexibility to be able to pull them off on one side and then bring them back in a different sector, a different quadrant. And I just found that the bigger the unit is, the more we'll pull it off, because it's just not, you know, it's just too hard to bring it back on where you need it.
Well, what did you run?
We could talk strategy about, you know, and I guess I haven't played this new book, but as we discussed, it's really hard to dig out free world forces. I think one way you might do it is with a really large unit of the NBA. You're going to take casualties. You're going to take a lot of casualties. If you have a larger unit, it's harder to pin you. So I think there are still things that you could do. If you really need to dig out that U.S. Now you did point out, Tom, that there's good artillery, but if you need to take and hold that ground, you're going to need big units to do it.
Yeah, and remember the PAVN forces with their skill. We haven't gotten to this yet, but they have a hard time ranging in when there's any sort of terrain, and there's a lot of terrain in Vietnam.
Yeah, a lot of jungle.
Basically, need 6s.
So what do you run? Do you run the big 25 pointer or the 17? Or
I go with the 14-point unit, the middle size one.
Still pretty big, man.
No, and it just seems more manageable. You know, it's just you can get it in and out and mix it in, and it doesn't take up so much real estate. I mean, there's good pros and cons, but it's also, when you pull it, it's another victory point. Whereas it's harder to destroy one of those bigger units and lose that victory point. So, and I do pull units a lot. I mean, I do the voluntary withdrawal quite often, because it's just, I seldom win by taking an objective. I almost always win by political victory conditions. So, it's almost always a chance where I have to pull something off somewhere and throw it out into another area that's less secure to take out a weak unit that's off on its own.
I think it's interesting you mentioned that, Tom, because I think that's really it's really elegant design. It's one of the things I've always really enjoyed about the Vietnam system, is that it's not just smash mouth football like Flames of War. You know, there's 2 objectives on each side. Let's beat the crap out of each other till somebody can grab one. Or in the old days, you could break morale. But this is different, and this is, you know, the free world forces are going to be really hard to dig out. They're going to be good at holding objectives, and the guerrilla tactics and the larger units, the cheaper larger units, are going to favor an attrition strategy, and the victory point structure supports that in a way that really does mirror the conflict historically, where killing tanks, taking out high prestige units, or like the helicopters, for example, and things like that, those are great for propaganda. They're bad for enemy morale. NBC News is going to put it up that night. It's a really elegant piece of design that they've made the victory conditions reflect the different priorities that the two sides had on the battlefield.
Well, I'll tell you something I'm noticing right away, and it's something I was going to bring up in our last broadcast, but with these guys, I would go big, and I'll tell you why. You look at the majority of the teams that you get with this infantry company, it's AK-47 teams. They have a range of 8 inches. U.S. M16 units have a range of 12, and the ANZACs with their SLRs have a range of 16. So if I'm going to apply any type of my firepower, other than my LMG teams, I got to get into you. And odds are you're going to maybe hit me for a full turn before I can even get in there. So, I mean, that's something, too, where you really have to push these guys in. I mean, they're hit on a 3-up. So you look at right away that I think the counter an American infantry list, I haven't played it, so I'm speculating here. I would say that's a big difference, where in Flames of War, Team Yankee, all standard infantry teams fire the same distance. This, I mean, you're giving up against ANZACs with the SLRs. They can fire twice the range you can.
Yeah, but just remember the terrain. You're going to have elephant grass. You're going to have a lot of standing jungle/woods anyways.
Yeah,
there's two things to counter that, and it's a totally legitimate point. Mitch, if they're caught in the type of terrain where they're going to advance over open ground versus free world forces, I mean, that's going to be hell. But there's two things to remember. One is the guerrilla deployment, which allows them to get closer. And the other one is, as Tom just said, something that a lot of Flames of War players are not going to be used to when you play in Nam is that elephant grass. And you really should check that out. We should talk about it when we get a chance, because elephant grass is a different beast than we've seen anywhere else in the Flames of War universe, that really limits line of sight and really cuts down ranges in a way that favors a large group of AK-47 toting guys who just happen to have fantastic morale. So there are counters to that range disparity hardwired into the system.
Yes. In my last game, there was a situation where we rolled elephant grass where infantry and gun teams could not be seen beyond 6 inches. Yet I could see even though they were concealed, I could see the ARVN vehicles at full line of sight. So I was engaging with recoilless rifles and other things that just couldn't be shot back at until they got in close. So it was, which then happened to be RPG range. So it was kind of interesting, like long range ambushes, and the ARVN didn't even know where it was coming from.
And again, my history nerd, senses are tingling, because that's just fantastic. I mean, where else in Flames of War can you pull off an ambush like that? Where your recoilless rifles are shooting at tanks that can't see them back, and they got to send dudes into the bush to try to get, find them, identify them, and destroy them. That's perfect. That's what.
But on the other hand, with the version 4 artillery rules, you can range in on a point. You don't have to range in on a team. So even though he couldn't see my teams, he could call in his 3 mortar platoons on me, and they did a number.
Well, you know what? Yeah, well, and that's U.S. Army doctrine. I was an artilleryman, and you know what? You level the grid square, man.
Yep.
Right. You got the tubes to do it. You level that grid square, and they'll do it. They're like, Charlie's over there. We don't know exactly. Just boom, fire mission.
So one question I have for you guys, since you've played this before, and I haven't, with these forces you can buy, it looks like 6 or 8, the booby traps. What are the booby traps? Like, how do they work? Are they any different than in any other game?
Yeah, it's kind of like a mine. But it's like a mine that you can put anywhere you want, even under a team, that's already there. So they're limited, but they can be key when you put them under key teams, like a command team or something like that. And then it's pretty much stuck in place unless it can diffuse it and clear it. But so they can be useful.
So anytime during a game, I could sit there and say, all right, so you're dug in, I'm just going to put this booby trap underneath you.
Yeah, there's some missions that in the fire-based mission that you can't put, so it wouldn't make sense for them to be inside a fire base. So there are some limitations in some of the scenarios, but most of them you can put them where you want, including under a team that's been.
All right. Moving on.
Guerrilla minefield.
Yeah. So with the infantry company, you can take. You have to take 2 mandatory formations. You could take machine gun platoon or machine gun bunkers, recoilless rifle, mortars, air, and a special tasks company within that. And we're going to get to those next. The bunkers are interesting. I mean, they're hit on a 2-up, but they're tough to get rid of.
Yeah, and they also yield victory points, 1 per. They've gone up. You used to have to kill 3 of them to get a victory point. Now each of them gives a victory point.
There's an excellent article online that talks all about that. I think it's on nodicenoGlory.com.
Yeah.
And I have to admit, maybe you can walk us through it, Tom. I recall the bunkers were very hard to kill in Tour of Duty era Flames of War, but I'm not too familiar with how hard they are now in version 4. What's the difference there?
They're about equally as hard to kill, I think. They in version 3, you couldn't bombard them, you couldn't spot, they're invulnerable to those kind of things. There was a different kind of bunker too in the version 3, Tour of Duty. There was a bigger one, and now they're basically just nest, so they just re-roll firepower checks. So I think that they're slightly easier to kill than they used to be, and they give up more points, so victory points wise. So I'm less enthused about using bunkers unless the mission requires. And there is like a bunker complex mission where you have to take bunkers, which are actually free but not part of your force.
Yeah, and that's too bad because that hidden VC bunker. Is so iconic to the experience of the Vietnam War, or at least that one that we've been exposed to through movies and television. That I enjoyed deploying them in Tour of Duty because they were unexpected and a real pain in the ass as a hidden camouflage bunker should be.
Yeah. They changed them. You used to be able to take a full up true bunker and nest as separate things, but now they're basically all just nest.
So maybe they felt that was too powerful somehow.
Yeah.
Well, I would take the HMGs just because I'm going to offset my my range with my they have a 24-inch range. The fact that I am, I'm stuck on the range.
Yeah.
Now the special,
you got to get out there, play this more.
Yeah.
Range is my last concern as a PAVN player. And
I'm facilitating the conversation.
You get your victory points by killing tanks and killing air. So I got to max the AT assets and max the anti-air assets. I can't tell you when I've used heavy machine guns in my forces. It used to be when you could take them as a headquarters choice or part of your headquarters and attach them. They weren't so bad, but that's gone. Now it's just a platoon of 3.
So I think it's a really interesting point. And I think you guys mentioned in the first episode that you can imagine people having maybe it's not really a tournament, maybe rule set per se, but a NAM tournament. It would really be important that the organizer think very carefully about how they're going to handle terrain and to let the players know ahead of time because, Mitch, I think you're coming from a non-elephant grass kind of mindset, which makes perfect sense, and that's how most of the world works. But you throw that elephant grass down and the dense jungle-type terrain that, is often appropriate. It's not always appropriate, but is often appropriate in this theater, and it just completely changes the game. So that would be a big deal. How the organizer defines the terrain, it would make a huge deal in terms of what the battles were like.
Yeah, all that open space, which would be open on a normal board, that's all elephant grass. And anything but a 1, I think in a 1 it's just basically open, but 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6.
Go ahead, Tom. 2, 3, 5, or 6. What? You cut out there.
Basically, a 2 or above, the elephant grass does have an effect, and it's almost always cutting down line.
Yeah, it cuts down line of sight and reduces ranges visibility.
Yeah, and it almost always benefits the PAVN guys.
Those PAVN.
local forces, all those guys.
And by the way, Mitch, we're going to get there, but I wanted you to feel a little bit better. A comment that you made in the first podcast stood out to me, that you were afraid that you couldn't use the phrase Viet Cong, that it was too politically incorrect.
It's listed once in the books. But it's the only time it's listed.
Well, that's because it's only appropriate to those folks.
Yeah.
Really.
But it's still
cultural apparatus.
What's that? Well, it's an interesting point. I'll spend 2 seconds on it, but the reason that they don't use it a lot, I think, is they're trying to be a little bit more objective. The word that Vietnam Cong San, as they write it down there, actually was really pejorative in Vietnamese. It was designed to say basically like communist traitors to Vietnam is the implication. Right. So it's super pejorative, but it really was only used to be those local and main force guys. But it's right there. It's on what are we looking at? Page 170. So don't feel too bad. You can still say it.
Well, I will still say it. I know it's not, and I got that from Ken Burns' thing.
And you have like little history nerds like me, like, well, technically these are not Viet Cong, these are NCAs.
Yeah, they're their main force.
Right. So, Special Task Battalion, these guys, well, they get the 1 slow 4 quicks. They get the Scout Special rule.
Except for they can't bring other units with them.
But these guys get a lot of the anti-tank RPGs.
And they get higher proportion.
Yeah. So these guys look pretty good, too.
Yeah, but they don't have that born in the north to die in the south. So, when they're done, they're done. They're not coming back. And but they are veterans. And one thing to point out here, too, is that if you look, there was a confusion. The Special Task Company is shown as being hit on a 3+. Phil Yates confirmed that on the forums just recently, that they are, in fact, are hit on a 4+, just like the headquarters. So they still are, fearless vets in the old parlance.
Yeah, take it. Go ahead. Oh, taking these with infantry is almost a must.
Yeah, they're pricey. I like them, but I don't always take them. If you're going to go see a lot of armor units, they're good because the higher percentage of their RPGs, but they lost their ability to take flamethrowers. That's gone. And they're really colorful, and it's really great that we can now take them as a battalion because that's a new option. Before it was just a single company, but you're going to need some of that support assets. And one thing I do like about these guys is that they can take the 82 millimeter recoilless rifle as a support as a formation option, and then they can take another one as a support option. So they can actually get 2 of those units, and they're the only PAVN organization that has that option.
Yeah, that is pretty nice.
These guys are really meant to represent the sappers that would go in and try to undermine the defenses at like a fortification and that sort of thing, right? These are your sappers on the wire kind of thing.
And I guess that's one of the things I'm most disappointed about the release of NOM. I'm excited about NOM overall, of course, but we didn't really see anything new for the North, the PAVN or any. It's the same stuff, same kit, and these guys really need a special model. I mean, they need to have the Bangalore torpedoes and the wire crossing ladders, and they need to have wire cutter guys, and it would be nice if we had the flamethrowers back in there option, but it tells you what unit to use, the VPA 202 or 702. That's the same thing as a normal PAVN infantry company. So they're saying just use the regular PAVN figures. I'm like, I really want something special for these guys.
It's interesting because the pictures that I've seen in Vietnam books about sappers, usually they had no shirt.
Oh yeah, they're gnarly.
Yeah, they had a shirt and a pair
shorts.
Shorts and a pair of those Ho Chi Minh sandals.
Yeah, they were stripped down to like nothing, so they could just wriggle through stuff, crawl through the mud, and yeah, they're a pretty gungy bunch.
But they're not as sexy as the shirtless artillery, which counts.
What was that, Mitch?
They're not as sexy as the shirtless artillery guys. I like the shirtless artillery guys.
It depends on your taste, really. It's a personal choice.
It really is. And there's nothing wrong with it. So let's go to because I know we want to talk about tanks and special rules. Let's talk about local forces. Once again, these guys, they're smaller. Only rifle teams. They get the Born in the North, Die in the South. They get guerrilla fighters. They get Scout. But these, like you just said, there's no change from the last time, and I think these would be one of the easier models to paint.
Yeah, they're okay. They suffer because they only have a much smaller percentage of RPGs, and that's one thing we didn't mention too. The standard RPG is the B40, but if you want to upgrade to the B41, that is 1 point per launcher. And that's huge. If you take a full company of PAVN, that's 9 points just to upgrade the RPGs. I'm like, it's a much better weapon system, but I don't know that that's really feasible. But these guys these guys might upgrade because they have so much less.
Yeah,
they
but
have a
look
much
at the
lower percentage of RPGs for their formation.
But look at the stat difference. It's expensive, but the B40 range of 8, AT 11, B41 range of 12. I know I'm stuck on range, but AT of 14, man. I mean, you possibly can. You kill a tank from the side.
Yeah, it's definitely better, but it's just such a gut check to put those extra points to upgrading them. But what I like with the local forces is I like to go really small because I really just are buying these guys for their support options. Their recoilless rifles and their anti-aircraft guns, and they're so cheap. You can get a small couple of companies, minimum-sized companies at headquarters, and just use them to get those additional anti-aircraft guns and recoilless rifles and mortars if you need them. So that's kind of why I like them. I like them as an additional force, not as a main force.
Yeah, they could be. I mean, you gotta be ready to take serious casualties if you're gonna run these guys as your mainstay. Although Mitch, look at default, they come with a 16-inch rifle.
Yeah. Thanks.
Now it would behoove you to take a large unit if you wanted to give them AK-47s because it's 5 points for the whole company,
right,
regardless of how many teams you've got. But in my experience with these guys. They could not achieve very much on the battlefield. This would be something that you would put these guys somewhere to hold an objective, maybe dig them in and hope for the best. They have a heck of a time. Look at their counterattack is 5. I mean, they are not charging American troops to cover. They're going to get massacred.
And that's why I don't bother upgrading them. I basically, the last game I was taking them at the middle size company, the 7-pointer with the 9 rifle teams and the 2 RPGs and the 1 LMG. And I basically would just run them until they get those 2 B40s knocked out because I was playing against nothing but M113s and Walker Bulldogs. So as soon as those things were knocked out, I'd pull the platoon or the company so I could, attempt to bring it back in under the, the voluntary withdrawal and the born in the north, die in the south. And that was it. They were just a nuisance. I was just throwing them to harass. Get in there, get a couple RPG shots, pull them off, and then recycle them. Even though that gave up a victory point every time, so long as I killed enough 113s during that process, it paid off.
Yeah. Well, I mean, hey, we got to make choices.
Yeah,
but,
they're a good unit, and now because of the lower relative cost of everything, so I never would run a PAVN battalion and a local force battalion on the same board. Well, now I can, and now I can bring in the additional recoilless rifles and additional anti-aircraft guns, which are really key assets. I mean, those are the things that make your money in trying to achieve the political victory. The infantry is really just harassing and holding, and you're never going to push, like Brian said. You're just not going to push free world infantry off an objective. Maybe now we can bombard them, but you still have a hard time ranging in. So, I have not successfully done that in the new version where I've been able to clear an objective and take an objective. So I got to go for the cheap points to win a game.
Now I got to say in their defense, guys, if you're into the history, I mean, these are fantastic models. They're really characterful. They're easy to paint up, but they've got a lot of depth, and a lot of character. They really look iconic. So it's nice. I mean, when I put them on the table, I'm like, okay, I'm playing a Vietnam game,
Yeah. I especially love the flags on the command teams. Those are really nice.
Yeah, they're kind of neat. Let's go. What are we down to? Hopefully people are not falling asleep. You guys want to talk about armor and their mech infantry, and we probably after that can talk about our thoughts, but so let's go with your T-3485s. What I kind of dig here with these guys it's only one mandatory company that you have to take, And you can get 13 of these bad boys for 16 points. These guys are not spectacular, man. Their courage, morale, and remount are all 3-ups. They're hit on the 3-up. Not good in skill or assault, just like tanks and, all the new rules. But you can spam the hell of these on the table. And you look at a lot of guys that have played Russian T-34s. How many times do you get to spam the T-34-85s? Well, NAM gives you the choice, but they're going to die pretty quickly. That front armor is kind of light.
Yeah, it depends on what you're playing against. Like, you go against the ARVN guys with the 113 hordes, and these guys are a great antidote.
Oh, yeah.
And they're pretty good against Walker Bulldogs, but they're not going to take a RPG, a law hit very well, and they're not going to stand up to any of the heavy armor. But again, you got swarms of them, so you're getting 13 of these things for the price of 2 or 3 M48s or Centurions. So again, it's about the flanks, and of course with the reduced visibility and the elephant grass and all that stuff, you got good possibilities of getting on the flanks unless they're well protected by infantry. So they kind of, and also these T-34s have the heavier 50 cal, right? In World War II, we don't get that, the heavy 50 cal A machine gun.
Right.
Yeah, and that's, again, victory points. These are nice little anti-helicopter platforms. Cruising all over, and the helicopters have a harder time killing them. So, it's every little A machine gun you can put on the board helps. So that's what I think with these armor formations really come into play.
Yeah, I want to analogize them to the East Germans and Team Yankee.
T-55s,
And the one thing I do want to bring back the point about terrain. They're going to have a hard time on a traditional Vietnam table getting in a cross-country dash or a road dash. Yeah. So that they're, and they're not getting spearheaded, unless I'm mistaken, by any other
no guerrilla deployment or any of that special stuff.
Yeah, so they're going to be slogging it. They're not going to be racing. I mean, it's going to be an unusual circumstance that they're going to be able to race up the flanks the way T-55s do in Team Yankee.
Yep.
Yep.
What they need is the visibility. If the elephant grass, is at the high end, the 6, then they got a chance. But anything else are just concealed, and they're still going to be covering significant spaces under enemy fire.
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be kind of an interesting one. You could take a ton of these dudes, but once again, unless you take multiple battalions, you can only take 2 of the K1s, but you can mix this in with either a K2, K3, or a mechanized company. You can only take one of them, and you get the ZSU 57-2s. But here's the one that some dude's going to run. At 100 points, the K2 Ironclad Company. Geez, for 100 points, you could take 21 of these, which is, you could take in Team Yankee 21 T-72s for 99 points. So that guy that likes to spam a ton of stuff, here's your K2 Ironclad. Once again, you're right, terrain's going to dictate what these guys can do, but that's a lot of tanks coming at you, and these things can fight U.S. and free world tanks pretty much on par. They match up very well against the M48s, the Walker Bulldogs. These guys are going to be tough. Let's hope we don't see that on a table. But if you're running up against a Fate of a Nation force, this may not be a bad thing to take.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. It's such a novelty to run, North Vietnamese armor. They didn't want to risk any of it against the United States in the war, and they knew they would have been, devastated by the air power, if nothing else. And so they really didn't deploy them in numbers until the U.S. had disengaged from the ground conflict. So throwing them out there, sometimes it feels almost a little, sacrilegious, throwing them out there. But a couple times that I have, it changes your game. It really brings something else to the table for the PAVN.
And remember at Lamson, 719, in that quote unquote third phase, they did have U.S. air support and U.S. helicopters, and they did, of course, suffer some of them, but they didn't do as poorly as they thought against that U.S. air power. They still did a good job taking out the ARVN forces up in that area, And they were only kilometers away from the 5th Mech Infantry. I mean, they just didn't cross the border into Laos in that operation, so they got pretty close. So I think that they did hesitate. They did not want, it's a stated fact, they did not want to engage U.S. forces with their armor forces, but they were all about jumping all over the ARVN guys, even when.
Yeah, and like you pointed out earlier, though, Tom, interestingly enough, the rules on victory points, the political scoring, applies both ways. So
Yep.
You are going to give yourself an interesting asset, but you're also creating an avenue for the free world player to score a lot of points that they might not otherwise if you don't take armor.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of the K2, the T-54 for the Vietnamese Army. I have not played at all with the K1s yet. K3s, I think that's where it might be at. I think that's kind of an interesting option for the forces that we have.
Yeah, I can see that.
Those were the only tanks that were actually deployed directly against U.S. Ground troops, as I understand it.
Yeah, except for there were M48s there. It was bad news.
Yeah, that was a little problem.
Yeah. But interestingly, though, the PT-76, it has stabilizers. It has rate of fire 2. It has a decent gun, AT-13, firepower 3+. It's amphibious. It has no armor to speak of, as far as tank versus tank stuff. But again, neither does the T-34-85. So I think given its low point cost and its higher rate of fire and the gun that it has, I kind of like the K3.
Hey, boy, you can really take a lot of them. You could take 11 of them for 13 points in the company. And you only get one company again, like you said, Mitch.
Yeah, they're a little bit cheaper than they're a little bit cheaper than the T-34-85.
Yeah. I mean, they don't have the survivability, but they've got the maneuverability. And it's hard to not want to take them if you're interested in the history, because they really are an iconic piece of armor for the NVA. Was used a lot, and it's a well suited. It's a well suited vehicle for the environment. It's light, but it's maneuverable. It's amphibious in an extremely watery country.
Yeah.
Easy to maintain, etc. So, and in the game, it's a pretty good bang for your buck. But again, you do open up a well of victory points for the free world player that might otherwise not be available.
Yeah, but they have to kill 3 of these to get one of them. So they're, not one for.
So that's a bit better.
So looking at what we got left here, we got mech infantry, which are mounted in the BTR 50 PKs. Once again, these guys are, wow. I mean, you can only take it as a support choice within a tank unit. 30 points for that big-ass platoon. Once again, 25 stands, 10 BTR 50 PKs. I don't see the advantage of these guys.
Well, they're actually a formation unit. They're not a support unit for the ironclad organizations. And it's interesting because they have the upgrade of the RPG. They come with the B40 upgrade, the B41 upgrade, if you were, at 30 points. And so their full-size mech infantry company costs the same as a normal PAVN full-size infantry company, but they get the upgrade of the B40s for free, and then they also get the 10 BTR 50s. So they're kind of got some options. What they lose is the born in the north, the die in the south, and the fight and the voluntary withdrawal. So they are less flexible. But again, that's another 10 anti-aircraft machine guns on the board. It's knocking down helicopters, which yield a victory point each. So I kind of interested in this option. I haven't run them yet. I don't have the BTR 50s to try it, but it's something I think I'm going to put on my radar screen.
So
they are really interesting. I was going to say, here, Mitch, is the PAVN forces analogy to the boats. When have you ever seen these on the table? I don't know anyone who owns them.
Based on what Tom just said,
though, because they would be so unexpected, and they do bring that mobility to let those PAVN guys jump out with their AKs and their B40.
B41s for them.
And do some serious damage.
So my question here is, and if you notice too, they have a typo. It says optional B40 because they list the B40 anti-tank team here in the stat line.
That is interesting. It says optional, but the
it's the B-41
options say B-41.
So would you take this as a support choice, or would you take this as a part of a ironclad company? Because it doesn't come as its own formation. I probably would take this as a support platoon with like a local force battalion. But once again, that's me.
Yeah, I don't know. I was inclined to take armor, I think, which I haven't done much of, admittedly. I most play purely infantry for the PAVN and local forces. If I think I was going to take mechanized stuff, I'd take either the T-34-85s or the PT-76s, just for their longer range and their cheap cost and so on. But these guys also give up a victory point per 3 APCs destroyed, by the way. So they're I don't know. I just have to play with it and try it out, I guess. But I definitely would want one of these to support an ironclad formation as a formation unit to provide that infantry component. And but as far as using these guys to support leg infantry, I'm not so sure.
It's like probably overkill.
Units.
Well, I'll tell you what is out of the rest of the stuff, and I know we talked about most of the support options. But I want you guys to tell me this on page 183. It's great. Battlefront has books that go up to page 183. Now, this PAVN local resistance, that is kind of an interesting thing. Like, it looks like here with these, it doesn't really, it's just they're rifle teams, but it's independent infantry, amphibious, daily business, exposed, observer, and questioned. Are these like the Skorzeny forces from Piper's Charge in Nam? And this team cannot be shot at. I don't get what do these guys do?
Yeah, they're kind of weird. They're different than they used to be in Tour Duty. Basically, all they do now is relocate objectives. They pull the objective towards them if they're within 8 inches of the objective. And I'm not exactly sure if you can daisy chain these things or not. Like, could you have multiple local forces team in a daisy chain and have one pull? And it's on a roll. It's not automatic, by the way. So their effects on the battlefield. I'm going to pull up the Tour of Duty thing, but it seems like they have less options on what they can do.
Now they do count as observers.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's cool. I missed that part.
So until they have to be interrogated to be gotten rid of unless they shoot or something like that, right? Yeah. So the Free World Forces have to move up to them and make a roll to kind of discover their real loyalties. But in the meantime, they can act observers and they can move objectives closer to their side. So it's an attempt to bring in some of that confusion that was on the battlefield historically as to who was on your side and who wasn't. And to reflect the rules of engagement that prevented necessarily maybe engaging people when you were sure that what they were doing, or because sometimes you'd engage people and you were wrong, and that's gonna lose the war for you in multiple ways. So it's interesting. I think they're as you pointed out earlier, Mitch, with the guerrilla booby traps and minefields. This is another way that the PAVN player can really try to aggravate the free world player that, it's there. This is an asymmetrical war historically, and you can play it that way with the options that they give you here. This is one of the ways you can do that.
Wow. Well, I'll tell you, I like these guys, and it's too bad that my buddy has, Sean Throck, has these dudes already, because I like playing the quote-unquote bad guys. But I think these guys would be really fun to play. I think these guys are different. And I'll tell you what, and I'm going to ask you guys, these guys seem to be fun to play against.
Yeah. And especially with these guys, you're talking about the resistance teams. Did you note they're amphibious? So I guess you can use your sampan models. They don't have them as separate entries. But like in Tour Duty, they have them with, in Brown Water Navy, they have them as sampan version, but I guess they can run across the field, jump into the water, and turn into a boat, and then jump out of the water, turn back into an infantry team. So
Yeah, just to run through the rules real quick. First of all, they don't necessarily do exactly what the nationalist player wants them to do. Both players get to roll a dice, and the higher rolling player uses the result to move them. Yeah. So the free world player can move them out of the way if they win the dice roll. If they shoot or they fail a roll to smuggle an objective, or they're successfully questioned, you remove them. So if they shoot, they only get to shoot once. I don't know how often. I don't know why you do that.
Yeah, you would never shoot them.
But like I said, the free world infantry guys can go up to them, or tank unit leaders can go up and question them. And on a 5-up, they're destroyed. Otherwise, they're left alone.
Yeah. And I think they're destroyed when they actually successfully move objective, not when they fail. When they succeed, they get exchanged out, I think.
Oh, I'm looking at it, and it says, destroy a resistance team after it shoots, or if it fails to smuggle an objective, or is successfully questioned. So smuggling says, in the starting step when you're placing ambushes, a nationalist player may attempt to move objectives. Roll a die for each objective being moved. On a 4+, you relocate the objective to the location of a resistance team within 8 inches. Oh, and destroy the resistance team. Otherwise, the objective. So I guess either way.
Yeah, that's weird. I thought it was just that they succeed, they get pulled off, but whether they succeed or failed, so that's dicey at 2 points a pop. I mean, there's a lot of support units you can get for 2 points in the PAVN and local force units. You know, anti-aircraft guns, mortars, and so on. So I don't know. They look neat, they're colorful, but I don't know that being that they're automatically destroyed, whether they succeed or fail on trying to move an objective, kind of makes them kind of limited.
There's certainly a very cool choice for scenario play for a game master to put out there.
Yeah.
Make the scenario interesting.
Yeah, I've actually got 2 sets of them. I've got one set that's on the medium bases, like they're supposed to be mounted, and then I have another set that's on small bases, and I use the small set just for villagers, terrain basically, and then I use these folks mixed in as the actual local resistance. So they're kind of fun. I've used them I haven't used them yet in NAM, but I've used them in Tour of Duty before. They were kind of cool to get out there, especially the boats, But
yeah, definitely a cool and flavorful option that's reflective of the period. Maybe not great for competitive play.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you. I mean, I really kind of think that these guys are going to be fun to play. I'm also thinking that we probably should do a whole other podcast on the special rules and scenarios, because, like I said, we got up to almost page 200. Ladies and gentlemen, we still have a lot more to talk about with this stuff, but I'll give you my 2 cents on this and then ask you guys what you think, but I am thinking that NAM, it's when I say not my thing, I find Vietnam interesting, but maybe too soon. I think that this game I think folks that are not so sure about this, I think this is something that they should at least pick up the rules. They should go play a demo game. I think they should try it. Tom, I think you're 100% right. I think 200 points or 100 points is too massive. It's going to be like moving around Roman legions. But if you look at what I miss from Flames of War, and definitely miss from Team Yankee, is I miss the infantry fight. I play Great War just because it's an all-infantry fight with tanks, but I think that buying the book here and getting an infantry force from one of the sides, maybe with a tank or 2, I think this is going to be really great. I hate painting air and helicopters. However, that stuff never excites me. I don't really, it's funny, when I made lists for Team Yankee this weekend, I go, it's typical Mitch Reed list, no artillery, no air. But I think this, with the off-board artillery, I think that you can get into it cheaply, by buying a couple of infantry boxes and maybe a tank or 2 and play a fun game. Are you going to see a tournament in this? With all these special rules, I don't know. But I think that if you just want to hang out and at your club, store, neighborhood, play a fun game, I think NAM really is. It's going in a different direction for Battlefront, and I think this is a great book. And I tell you this, I'm excited about getting some of these forces. I kind of hope the forces I want to collect are not coming out at the end, which is something we should also have in a whole other podcast, which what the release schedule is here. But overall, not interested in NOM before. I've read this book. I can't put it down. Well, it's easy because it's electronic, but I keep looking through it, and there's more stuff that I really want to play in here. I definitely want to get a Marine force with some armored cav, free world. After us talking about the ANZACs today, I might do that, but I'm digging this. There's stuff in this I'm never going to play unless I go to Tom's house. Dude, I am never going to play with the boats, but I would like to. I really would, and I think this is what the community kind of needed. That this is fresh, and I think this is fun, and I want to hear what you guys think of this game so far.
Yeah, I agree. It's totally different, and it's what I like about it. I mean, I've been playing it since day one, since Brian with the Workings Illustrated iDrang article, and I've played the communist almost exclusively. I tell you, I've never run a single tank for any of my communist forces in dozens and dozens of games, and it's just fun. I like the way they play. I like the special rules, and it's one reason why I think I mentioned this in the first podcast we did, is that I like this better than Arab-Israeli War, because Arab-Israeli War was just World War II with bigger tanks on a desert board. But this was something totally different and a very good break. And I think this would excel as a convention game, for setup where people just kind of show up and play. It looks spectacular with all the helicopters or the brown water Navy stuff. So it's great for those participation games, but it's not going to be a tournament setting. It's just going to be games that you do with your local buds just for the fun of it, not really for the competition.
Yeah, I think there's an interesting choice in the format. This book, I think, as you guys talked about in the first episode, this book has everything in it. I know some people maybe are not too thrilled about how version 4 has been rolling out for mid-war. With, dribs and drabs and buy the book and then buy the cards, buy the command cards, buy the unit cards. This is a one-stop shopping. Maybe they'll come out with some other stuff for it, cards and stuff, but this book is huge and it's comprehensive, and the core of it is modeling an asymmetrical, warfare model, and it's different from anything else in Flames of War, and it has special rules to reflect that, I think, very elegantly. I mean, I'm not a veteran of the war, I didn't fight in it. Great respect for those who do, so I'd be interested if any of them have opinions on that, but I think it does a great job of trying to elegantly represent the nature of the combat with a number of fairly well-designed mechanisms that make it unique and interesting. At the same time, around that core, that hard core of what, like Tom said, that, PAVN infantry, U.S. Combined arms, heavy air support, things like that we think of as historically, the way it was. They've given you all the options. You want to run PAVN armor, you got it. You want to run ARVN armor, you got it. You want to run ACAVs, manned by burly Australians who never run away, you got it. So all the possibilities are there. There's a lot of really interesting things to do, and you've really got to change your mindset, like we said. And it'd probably be a good idea to come back for a third podcast at some point, or at least part of another one, to talk about the missions, which are different from and very reflective and flavorful of the combat in the theater, and the special rules which make for terrain, and those, again, we did get to talk about them a bit, but the medevac rule and the Born in the North and Die in the South rule, maybe not the best analogy, but a decent analogy might be our good buddy Luke from the old WWPD podcast once talked about. He ran his Japanese early war versus early war Russians, and there was something like that going on here, where there was these endless waves of the light Russian tanks crashing on the immovable Japanese infantry. There's something like that going on here, except you've got helicopters, you've got air support, you've got a lot of cool stuff going on. So I think they're offering a great product for people who, I think for the grognards, who are like, I want it in one book and I don't want to buy all the little stuff, and you know what? Here you go. You got it. And I think you're going to have fun with it. I'd like to run a tournament with it myself, or, maybe a red versus blue kind of tournament where you always make sure the matchups are historical forces, and then have it like a campaign event. Like, let's compare the total scores overall from both sides at the end of the day and see who, won. I think there's some options there. and I think people will really enjoy it.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Yep, definitely. I'm so glad that they re-engaged the target with Nam.
Yeah, I definitely think this is totally a right move for them. I'm excited about this, and I think a lot of other people will be as well. So, I mean, hey, I'm excited. I'll put it to you guys. Do you guys want to get together and do a third wrap-up for Nam? Because I think it's a hot book. I think that folks really want to hear, because I think we could talk history, and we definitely could take up an hour or two, as you guys have probably already been scratching your heads.
Yep.
How can they talk so much? Go ahead, I'm sorry.
There are a lot of special rules in the missions themselves that you don't see elsewhere. So we definitely, heck, I just got educated by Brian. I didn't know that the local resistance guys could call in artillery. So, now I think I might take some of those guys. So there's still a lot to be learned.
There's a lot. Yeah, how many pages are we talking here? 270? I mean, there's a lot in here, and it's new and it's different. It's really worth exploring.
And I don't know about you guys, but I just like buying rule books. And, look, you can see, like, all the rule books I have up there. I'm picking this one up. I'm definitely going to collect a force. So I'm going to thank the guys at Battlefront that you've given me something to be excited about. Because, like I said, and Tom said, too, it's a new game. And
we didn't get to mention it, too, but while you're talking about the rule book, I mean, it's beautiful. The miniatures are fantastic. A lot of new pictures. They've got all the painting sections.
Osprey, man.
Colors. They've got some new stuff for the vehicles with some of the newer, plastics, and it's a beautiful piece of work. In addition to being chock full of really cool stuff to play with, so it's nice to look at. You're going to want to have it on your shelf.
Definitely. Well, I'll tell you what. We'll continue this conversation. For anybody that wants, come check out our forums at NoDiceNoGlory.com. Hit up the forums with Battlefront's forums closing pretty soon. This is going to be the one place you kind of get to connect with the community again. And, of course, we hope that you guys come and hit the site and listen to the podcast. But I think we'll be back with the third installment of Nam. And I'm excited, guys.
Cool.
Hey, thanks for having us, and I just want to say again, make sure you hit up the articles on the website. They're really informative. I really enjoyed those, Tom, and there's a lot of great insights there on the competitive potential of the different units that we didn't get into all the details today, but it's all there on the article. So.
Yeah, thanks. And there's a lot of other articles by other free world forces and some of the other stuff we got going.
Yep, a lot of articles. Well, I guess we'll turn it back to Sean. And once again, thanks for listening to No Dice, No Glory, where we study the wargaming community roll by roll.
Thanks so much for listening tonight. Remember, you can find all the best in historical wargaming and tabletop coverage at our website, www.nodicenoGlory.com. And don't forget to keep the conversation going on our No Dice, No Glory forums. Just click the little button at the top of the website and it'll take you to where the action is. Have a great game and a great night.